me create a little box here. Okay, so I want to make something like this, where I have a cut on the edge. So I have the edge of the part, and I want a little rectangular cut centered on that edge. Let me extrude this up. So I want a cut right here. Cut all the way through there. Oops. Let me fire this up so I can actually draw. So actually, if I do this, so I want to cut right here. I want this cut out right there. All right? I want to cut that out. How should I do it? Any ideas?
Sketch on the top plane or the front plane?
Yeah, I could do either one. I can sketch on the top or the front. So I prefer to sketch where I can see what's going on. If I sketch here, what am I going to see?
You're just gonna see it black.
I'm going to see two lines, right?
Yeah.
If I sketch here, what am I going to see?
The full rectangle.
The rectangle, like the shape of the thing, right? So I'm going to prefer to sketch here where I can see the shape of the thing, not just two lines going up and down. Because I'm going to sketch a rectangle, and here I'm going to have two lines on top of other lines. It's kind of going to be a pain. But here on the top plane, now I can actually see the thing that's the shape that I'm wanting to make. So that's where I'm going to do it. Which is right? Yeah. Kind of personal preference. But I prefer sketching where I can see it. So what do I need to sketch?
A rectangle.
A rectangle. Where do I need to sketch it?
On the center of that line.
The side of the
I want it centered on that line, right? But I want to make it right here. Why did I do that? Why didn't I sketch it on that edge?
Because you can move it over with the midpoint.
Because I sketch it. Oh, see, look, I accidentally. That's exactly why. Because I accidentally clicked my corner on the midpoint. That's number one. If I do that, I can never make it centered. But if I click it here, even now I've got two edges on top of each other. I've got this edge and this edge. I have to be a little bit more careful how I pick which thing to make sure I get the center of the right thing.
Stop sharing on our screen.
I know. You're just going to have to watch up here. And then watch the video if you need to look at it closer. If I do an offset, now I can just do midpoint. I can just go, ooh, easy to grab that edge, easy to grab that edge, right? They're easier to grab if they're not on top of each other. If it's on top of each other, now you have to have more time to figure out, okay, which is the one I want, and da-da-da. If they're over here, it's easy to pick. So I like to have them over here, and then click on them, they go, whoop, back together, right? It's faster. Now if I can grab this corner and look, whoop, grab this corner, it's behaving correctly. Like I said, make sure it behaves correctly before you add any dimensions. It is centered there, right? Also, I use the rectangle, I didn't draw 4 lines, right? It's easier. It's faster to draw a rectangle, click, click, than it is to go click, 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 click. Ah, it's not horizontal, click, click, right? So, what's faster? Do the thing that's faster. Do the thing that's easier. So now I can go in and add a dimension. So I can tell it I want it to be 0.75 deep, and I can tell it to be 1.5 inches wide, right? Boom. I hit finish. I can extrude it. Tell it there. I want to go down 1/4 inch. What do I do?
Negative 0.2.
Yeah, distance for negative 0.25 goes into it. What if I want to make it go all the way through? Do I just say negative 1?
No, you use the all.
Nope.
Extent time.
Say all. Right? Go to go all. If I haven't even done that yet, I just go here and I say all. Nothing happened. Ah!
You don't know what direction to go.
What should I do?
I usually drag it down because then I.
So look at the arrow. The arrow's telling you that it's wanting to extrude up all the way through.
Right.
Because remember, the default is to go away from the part. It doesn't, like, it didn't click in its head to like, oh, all means I should be cut. Because you can't extrude forever. It's impossible. So just hit flip, and now it's automatically going to switch to cut.
Oh, flip.
Yeah, just hit that little flip button right there. It goes down. It's going to cut into it.
Oh, that's useful.
In other programs, so like in Inventor, you tell it all the way through, it automatically switches it to cut and goes into the part. In SolidWorks, you have to have a separate command for adding for extrude and a separate command for cutting extrude. It's not the same command, it's two different commands. Because that's the way they wanted to do it. So again, knowing the program, so say all the way through. All right. So now if I go back and I change this to be 3 inches thick, it still goes all the way through, right? What happens if I change this dimension to be 5? What's going to happen to my slot?
Your main 2 inches from, it'll remain centered on the part.
It's going to remain centered. Even though this sketch is uncentered, it's still going to be centered, right? Is it going to stay, is it going to get wider, or is it going to stay the same width?
Same width.
Yeah. Because I dimensioned how wide it was. So it's going to stay the same width, and it's going to stay centered. What if I want it to always be a 1/2 inch from the side? What should I do?
Define the dimension in relation to the side in general.
Yeah, so instead of doing this dimension, do that dimension. Oops. Dimension from here to there, 0.5, right? Now it's there. And now if I go back and edit this, it's always going to be a 1/2 inch on that side. Okay? So dimension the thing you care about. Yes?
So I thought you meant something different. I was going to make sure that this would work. You could also define the length of that cut as like half the length of the overall line.
I could. Yeah.
That's kind of
So I could also do an equation like you said. So remember this dimension? If I put my mouse over it, it says D1, right? It has that D number. So I could say that. I could say that I want it to be, so I want this cut to be half the width of that. So I could say this dimension is D1 divided by 2. So now it's telling me it's 1.5 inches. And then if I change this one to be 8, that's going to be 4. So yeah, we can do that too. So you can use equations, but you can also change what you're dimensioning to. All kinds of different things. Remember, if you're going to do the math, do the equation, let it solve it. Don't solve the equation yourself. Ever. So if you come up with a situation where you think that, oh, an equation is going to work here, and there's sometimes the equations are great. I did like the Lego blocks. There's a bunch of equations on how different things should be proportional and sized in a Lego block. For that, yeah, use equations. You're given equations for the size of that, use that. But don't solve the equation. Just put it in. Let it do the math. Okay? So centering on an edge, easy, right? Just make a rectangle, midpoint, and dimension it relative to whatever it needs to be dimensioned to. Same thing. Sometimes instead of this dimension, you're given this dimension. Use whatever dimension that they give you on the drawing. Okay? So if I give you this, and I tell you this dimension, use this dimension on your sketch. If I give you this and give you this dimension, use this dimension on the sketch. Right? What about on this bottom one? So on this one, which of these do you think is the important dimension? The 2 or the side 2 or the middle 2?
Oh.
So we're going to make this slot here, we want it to be centered on the part. And so that's the next thing, is centering things away from the edge.
Oh.
But what do you think is this 2 here important, or is this 2 here important? Which do I care about more, the width of the slot or being 2 inches from the side? Remember what is this for?
To receive something.
Remember, what did I tell you this was for?
Oh, it's the
Oh,
Kleenex.
yes, for Kleenex box, right? So this is the slot that Kleenex comes out of. Or, so this is where sometimes this random part is hard to figure out what's important. This part here that we know what it does, a little bit easier. So that's a slot for the clinics to come out. So in that case, what do you think is more important? How wide that slot is, or how far it is from the edge?
The width.
The width of the slot. Because then you get your finger there to grab the Kleenex to get started out, right? So if this thing becomes skinnier, so if they decide, oh, we don't want it at 6 inches, we want it at 4 inches, you still need it wide enough to get your fingers in there. And so 2 inches, you know, that's enough for fingers and a little bit of pinch space, right? If that went down to 1 inch, I can't get 2 fingers into 1 inch, or even like just even 2 fingers stuck together is 1 inch and 3/8. Just that much, right? I need at least that much. So in this case, I need to have that size for my fingers. So that's the important dimension. So when we do it, this is what I'm going to care about. I'm going to make it centered and use this dimension, not this dimension, right?
Depends on application.
Yeah, it's all application. So that's where, yeah, some random block, it's hard to determine the application. So that's why designing our own stuff is sometimes easier than drawing it out of the book, because here we have to kind of figure it out. Drawing your own stuff, you know. So let's do this one. I need to center this thing away from the edge. So let's get out of here. I want to do a similar thing to that. So I'm gonna kind of get there. So first thing is I want to make that slot. I want to have it centered on the part, kind of over here, right? So actually, I'll just edit this part to be that. Let's go. So it needs to be 13¼ by 16. So I'm just gonna go here. And change my extrude to be 4 millimeters. Boom, there we go, right? There, I got that. So I need to do that slot. What should I do? Make a slot, or make a sketch though, right? Sketch on that surface, and then sketch my slot. Sketch my geometry. Which one should I use? The center to center, the overall, center point?
Center point.
So if we look at here,
Center to center would mean it would be centered in.
did I give you the center to center distance?
Overall.
I give you the overall distance, right? So which one do you think you should probably use? The overall. So we click overall, now we can just click, click, click. Draw on the slot. So there's my slot. Is it centered on the part? No. So I want it centered up and down, right? I want it centered up and down. Is it centered side to side? No. It's off to the side over here. It's not centered side to side, but it is centered up and down. How can I make that centered up and down? Without dimensioning it. I want to make the geometry centered. I want to use a geometric constraint.
You define the center line there as a midpoint between the two face edges?
You're on the right edge, the right thing.
Where the midpoint of that solid line rather than the...
So I can use the midpoints, right?
Yeah.
Watch this. I do a line from the end of here to the midpoint. Now I can move this. Those are connected, right? What happens if it's actually in the middle of the part? What happens to that line?
Becomes horizontal.
Yeah, so I make that line horizontal, it locks in the middle of the part. Now what if I grab this corner? Goes in and out, and it stays centered on the part, vertically.
Would it be better to make that a line of construction line?
Yeah, sure. It's not part of my...
No, it's not necessary.
It's not part of my profile. It's not part of the shape that I care about. So yeah, make it a construction line. But it still counts as a line. So right now I'm at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things. I'm approaching my 8 lines max, right? But this is all I really need right here. But you can see by making that line, making it horizontal, now it's locked that in where it has to be centered that way. So now I can start dimensioning it, because now it's behaving the way I want it to behave. So now I can tell it to be 6.75 by 2 and 1 1/4 in. So dimension my 1.25, my 2 inches there, and my 6 inches there. And it locks it down. And then I can cut it through. So cut it all the way through, flip it, all right. Now if I go in and edit my part, and I make it 4 inches, that slot is still centered on the part. Okay? Make sense?
That's so much easier than how I did that. I didn't know the slot tool existed, so I did a square and two rectangle and 2 circles.
And so that's why I used to use it before they started adding the slot command to everything. Because the slot command only was added to the Fusion in the last year. Until then, you had to do a rectangle and then add two semicircles on the end, or you had to draw a rectangle, then fill at the corners. So either of those ways was how we used to do it. All right, so doing that. So what about centering something on a face? So let's say that I want to make a rectangle right in the middle of this face. Yep.
Wouldn't you be able to theoretically just do the exact same thing twice, where you center it on one line and center it on the other line?
Yeah. So yeah, let's say I want a rectangle right in the middle of this thing. So if I go to rectangle, look at my options for rectangle.
Center point.
I have a center option here, right?
Yes.
I probably want to use that rectangle. But first, it'd be nice if I found the center point of this face. How can I find the center of this face?
Center line.
There's 3 ways to do it. I want to find the exact center of this face.
One is to just throw 2 lines off the middle.
Don't even need 2 lines, right? Because as soon as I have 1 line, I can find the middle of that 1 line, right? So I can do either a line corner to corner, which is kind of my preference, because now I can see that that line is going corner to corner, and I can make it a construction line so I can know, all right, here's my construction line. I know it's going corner to corner. I know I have the exact middle of the thing. It could be line here. So actually, if you turn the construction on first, before you draw your line, then it'll make a construction automatically. So you can either do a vertical line there, horizontal line, or an angled line. All 3 of those, the midpoint of all 3 is right there in the middle. Which one is the right one to use? Kind of depends on what you got. So on the sample stuff today, there's sometimes where you want the center of the face, you do this way, but you want to center it between two different edges. Maybe this is the right one, because now I can also do the same line here, and now I have a midpoint between these 2 edges that I can move this way with the dimension, right? So I want it centered vertically, but I want it 2 inches from the side, so I could do just this line and use the midpoint of this line, right? All right, I could put in, let's say I could put a point right there, so that I can make a hole, right? So now this hole is halfway between this and this far over, or that far over, right? So I can center in one direction and give it a dimension another way. Does that make sense? But for centering like a rectangle or a slot on a rectangular face, my personal preference is to draw the rectangle line or the diagonal line. If what you do, I don't care, as long as it works. So center rectangle from there. Oops. I don't want it to be construction line. Boom. And now you see it's centered. It moves centered. And because it's a construction line, it's not breaking up my rectangle. If this was a regular line, now I've got 2 halves of my rectangle. It's kind of a pain. So anytime you're using a line help center stuff, make a construction line so that way it doesn't break up your shape. Okay? Fusion, a little bit less picky about it. SolidWorks, super picky about that. So now, what's the next step before I move on? Dimension.
Round, what does R mean? Radius. Right?
R is radius, yep. So I can dimension. So let's say I want this to be 1/2 inch from that side, and I want it to be 1 inch from that side. Boom. I can finish it, extrude it. Maybe I want this to go positive and add to it. So now I can give it a distance that way. Yep.
So you would do those lines if you didn't know the measurements of the sides? Like if you didn't know it was...
It depends on what I want, what I want to be important. So if I want it always to be 1/2 inch from this edge and always to be 1 inch from that edge, then I put those in. If I know that I always want this one to be a certain measurement, then I put this dimension. So kind of like if this is a lid for a box and I want the overhang to be 1/2 inch front and back and 1 inch on the side,
Yeah.
no matter how big I make the box, then I would do it this way. If I cared about this needs to be exactly 8 inches, then I would dimension this. Because then I could go here and say I want this to be 10 inches. And now this is always going to be 10 inches no matter what this changes to.
I meant the construction line.
Oh.
You know how you have the construction line?
Oh, this one?
From one corner to the
Yep.
other?
Yep. Sorry.
So you would use that if you didn't know the dimensions of the...
Well, it doesn't matter if I know it or not. It's easier to draw it corner to corner and say start on the midpoint.
Okay.
Because I could do the math, right? I could make an equation. I could take the dimension for this dimension and divide it by 2 and dimension here. Right? I could do that. That's more work.
Yeah.
It's easier for me to draw it.
Okay.
But yeah, sure, I could do that. I could go in and write the equation of this is dimension 1. So I could come over here. Instead of doing this, I could do a dimension from here to here and call it D1 divided by 2. I could. That's more work though.
Yeah.
Right? Like I said, I'm lazy. I want to do the thing that's easy and fast. They both work. Is one better than the other one? Not argument. I mean,
Situationally, maybe?
if you want to have the option of having it be center, but also maybe you need to make it off center, then maybe the equation might be better. But I don't. If you want it to be centered, make it centered. Don't make it don't have yourself do the math. That's kind of making it harder than it has to be. And definitely don't just put in and do the math in your head and give it the answer. Because then if you change it, it's not going to stay centered. You want to make it so it'll always stay centered when you move it. Does that make sense? All right. So there's that. Any questions on any of that so far? Centering on an edge, centering away from the edge. Yes, no?
Actually.
Yep.
So when you put in the construction line or whatnot, I understand it's cutting it in half where you're putting it, but to get the actual middle point on it, or is when you click
Every line has a midpoint.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you click that on, it'll as you click on it, is it choosing that middle point for you, or are you clicking
So I did this here, and once I did that center rectangle, as you move across the part, you're gonna get to where it has a little triangle next to it. That tells you it's on the midpoint.
Okay, now-
I could also just draw that center rectangle over here, and I can do the midpoint from the point to the line, and have it move in.
Okay.
Either way,
All right, that was my question.
yeah. So if you don't feel like sliding over and seeing where it goes, because for me that's a pretty quick thing, because it kind of jumps to that midpoint as you get close. So remember that first exercise, the eyeballing one, figuring out where that midpoint is. So if you can figure out pretty close to where it is, it's easy to go to it.
It's
And so,
back here.
Yeah. But if you're not sure, just draw it up here and use the midpoint constraint. Go ding ding and have it jump down. If that's going to be quicker for you, do that. So if that's easier option, it doesn't matter which way you do it as long as it gets there. Okay? Does that make sense? Any other questions? All right. So the next thing I had talked about, if you look through, is so I go through centering holes. Same thing we kind of just talked about. So I have you create the line from the midpoint to the midpoint to the midpoint, put it in, and then a line between there, find a midpoint, and then just slide it across. So what I just did, right? What's a common thing that happens when you have a hole? So like you have a cylinder, you've got a hole going one way. Usually you might need a set screw or something in coming from the side, right? So you need a hole lined up with another hole, right? Or you want it lined up with, like, here I've got a slot, I have you make a slot here. We want a hole lined up with this slot. But we can't see that slot from the face. And then there's a lot of times where you want to do something relative to something else that exists, but it's not on your the face where you start sketching. Does that make sense? So that's kind of the next big thing that I want to talk about before I kind of turn you loose. So I'm going to throw some holes in here, and I'm just going to be bad about it. Just throw some random holes. And I'm going to change the extrude thickness. Boom. All right. I got some random holes. I don't know where they are, right? You saw me just put them in randomly. Don't do that. But for this example, that kind of works because I want to make holes on this face that line up with those holes. So I want a hole over here that's lined up perfectly with the center of that hole. So I'm going to create a sketch over here. And how do I position a hole? What do I use? A point. So I'm going to draw a point. Actually, I'm not even going to do that right now. So I'm going to kind of wait to get there. So, but I want this hole here. So here's that top of that hole. If I look at that top of the hole here, it's what? What shape is it?
Circle.
Circle. If I look at it here, what shape is it?
Line.
It's a line, right? Becomes a line. So I want to make this show up over here. Because if I have a line, I can get to the midpoint of a line, right? So if I go in through Create, go down to here, this option called Project or Include. So this is a kind of a good one to do it too. The shortcut is P. So get used to just hitting P. It makes it a lot faster. So project is the one we want to use. So project takes anything that's not on the current sketch plane and makes it a line on our current sketch plane. So have you done stuff and had purple lines come up?
Yes.
That's a projected line. So it usually happens if you're dimensioning and you pick like the edge down here when you first, and then it brings that edge even though it lines up with another edge you already have. So if I can use project, I can pick that edge there. You can see it gave me a little purple line. I can say okay. So now I have a purple line sitting here. Because this part is set back, the edge is now kind of floating up there, above it. If I picked on the edge down here, so P for project again, and I pick the edge down here, let's see, pick on this one, I say okay, now I get a purple line. I can see the little purple circles at the end of it, the endpoints, that's lined up with this edge here. But it's on that other edge. So if your surface goes all the way up, it's going to give you a projected line on top of the other line. If your surface is offset, then you're going to get a line floating in the middle of space. Those purple lines don't move. They have a little icon that's the projected icon. It has like a little plane floating above a rectangle or above a cube. And so if I want to make new hole centered with these, now I can just draw a line from the midpoint. So just slide over till you hit the triangle and then go down Now it's centered. It can go up and down though, right? Same thing here. I draw a line, slide over until I get that, or I can just draw a line over here somewhere. And now I can use my midpoint from the bottom point of the line to that edge. So I just have to make sure that I pick not the big long blue edge, but I pick the short blue edge that's just there. Now that one's going up from there. And it doesn't matter if it's going up or down, because I could still dimension this one from here to here and give that dimension. Or I can dimension it from here to here. Or I just pick the line, right? Or I can pick it from here, and you can see by picking that edge first, it's going to project it. So you can see it's got a little faded line here. That if I pick something else, it'll bring it in. So, but I do that, hit finish, I do my hole, click there, tell them to be threaded holes. Maybe I want it to be a 1/2 inch thread. Whoa. But now, I'm having a problem. I want to go to those holes, right? So I probably shouldn't have done them both at the same time.
Well, that was the problem.
So I do this one and I tell it to go to that hole. And I make it the right size.
Now they're both going.
It's going to go to that hole.
Right.
But if I pick this one can't go to that hole.
I see, okay.
So I probably should have done one at a time. Again, right? They're not the same thing. They're not exactly the same. I shouldn't do them on the same sketch.
Because it's going to.
Yeah, because the same sketch has to go the same distance. So this is another good example of do one thing at a time. Even though they look really similar, I want the same diameter hole, the same thread going up to another hole, but they're going to different holes. They need to be different sketches. Okay, so I should probably just go here, take that one out. Just take out that. Have just this sketch there. Now I can go in, create a new sketch here, project, look at the bottom of this thing, grab it, say okay, draw a line up. Now I can dimension from there to there, or from the bottom up, or whatever. To that hole. And now I can even say, oh, maybe I want this one to be 1/2 inch, because that might happen. And maybe they are going to be different size diameters. Now I have the flexibility. Because they are definitely not going to the same thing. But now they each do their own thing. Okay, you can see they go to the hole here, but they don't go through the back side of the hole. Okay? If I go and I move these holes, I move this one to the back, and I move this one to the forward. Hit finish. They still are lined up, and they go all the way through to that hole.
Did you select the inside of the first hole?
Yeah.
Or the edge?
I picked the edge.
Okay.
So when I projected the edge, right at the surface. So, all right. If you project and you pick the surface, it'll give you a line for the top and a line for the bottom. In Fusion. In SolidWorks, yeah, it'll make you pick an edge only. It won't let you pick the surface. In Inventor, it'll let you pick the surface, but it might lock your file. Lock your file. So I recommend, when you're projecting, pick the edge only, don't pick the surface. Okay? Always pick the edge. That way you're going to get a line. All right? That works better in all the programs. So again, suggestions I give you, and kind of my guidelines, work for what works best across all of them. It might not be the best in any one specific one, but it's overall in general, they're the best guidelines. It's the kind of the best practices to do. Okay? Yeah.
And so when you move those on the top plane, those holes, when you move those around, the holes we created on the side with them because they're locked into the midpoint.
Yep, because it's tied to it. So if I get out here, so remember this line is this edge.
Right.
So if this edge moves, this line moves. This line moves, this line moves.
Right.
And then the hole is connected to here. So that's the parametric part of things are all connected. If I delete this hole, take that hole out, guess what's going to happen?
Plane.
There's other one too.
Yeah.
I'm going to get
Target box.
I'm going to get yellow boxes down here. It's like,
Oh.
I don't know what that is. Like the edge that I was using is gone. I don't know what to do. So the hole's still there because it's like it was here last time, but I don't know what happened. If I edit this, now that line is nice and yellow, telling me, hey, my friend is gone. My buddy's gone. I don't know where to go. Fix me now, right? And so that'll also happen if you change that. Let's see, if I make that into a countersink. Again, it's like, oh, the edge that I was looking at is gone. But this one didn't do that. This one's still fine. Why? That's the bottom, right? So the bottom's still the same diameter, the same thing. Because I can change the diameter, no problem. That's not going to affect it because it's just a longer or shorter line. But now that that edge is completely gone, now there's another thing making that edge. Now that's why it threw fit.
So would it be good practice also that if you're having multiple holes, have one to the same hole, the same thing, so you can make a change?
Maybe, yeah. And so that might be a thing that I never even thought about before. Right now, that if you have a thing that might change between a counterbore or a countersink or a through hole, maybe instead of projecting the top edge, project the bottom edge, because you know that thing's probably not going to change as much as the top might change. 30 years, light bulb right now, in class. You saw it. You see it like flash above my head.
Well,
And so it's constantly thinking about like how can I use this, and like oh that makes more sense. So don't be afraid of things breaking. You can always fix it. Like if this broke, all right, cool. I decided I didn't need that counterboard. All right, delete that yellow line. Go back, project the top of that counterbore, and then just midpoint that end point to that line. Then go ahead and dimension that back in again. And there we go. Now it's not a problem anymore. It's back to being normal. So I fixed the problem. So sometimes in the history, if you change something, it'll break stuff. Just fix it. Just go in, reconstrain it, do whatever. Okay. But that's part of what we're going to go through more in this class is trying to plan it out ahead of time, so that way things won't break as much. Okay. Any questions there? All right. So I'm going to stop this